for us. We're going to be going into the Old Testament today, long way back, and I'm going to be reading from a Bible that I think is absolutely fantastic. So we're going to go to the book of Exodus, which is the second book in the Bible. So Genesis, then Exodus. And I'm reading from this wonderful Bible that I've only discovered recently. It's actually called the International Children's Bible, but I think if you scratch out the word children's, it's actually, I think it's a great Bible for anyone. It's really good. And we've been using it in our Friday Bible study group. It's just straightforward. It's a very, very good and sound translation, and I've checked all that stuff out. So, but, it's just put in language that's easier for anyone, especially younger people, but actually I would say anyone, absolutely anyone. It's not really just for children. It has a few pictures in it, but, are we against pictures? I'm not against pictures. I'm not. So, if you don't want to look at the pictures, you don't have to. You might think that's too childish. I'm not above pictures. I love them. Okay, so what we're going to do in this story is, if we've got a PowerPoint, go ahead and great. We're going back to the time when the ancestors of the Jewish people were slaves in Egypt. Right, next one. Right, we've got a genealogy up here. So this tells you the family history of the people who ended up becoming the Jewish people. So it starts with Abraham, and he was in a country which is kind of roughly in the Iran-Iraq area. He was living there, and they had all kinds of gods, but he didn't actually know the true God until the true God spoke to him and started teaching him and told him to go, move with your family, take them all, and I'm going to show you where you're going to go. And he was obedient to that, and he went. So then he had a son, Isaac. He had a son called Jacob. Now, Jacob is important because he was also called Israel. That's his other name. So the land of Israel is named after Jacob.
Yes.
And the people who came after Jacob in his family line were called Israelites.
Yeah.
So we see a lot in the Old Testament that the people are called Israelites. And, the word Jew came along later. But it's all the same family. It's all the same people. So then we got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Then he had 12 sons. And but one of those sons was called Levi. Then Kohath, Amram, and then Moses. So, and down that line, the next famous person is Moses. So you can see, he's from that family, from Abraham, via Jacob. And here we have the story of Moses and his family at the time was living down in Egypt because the whole clump of them, all of Jacob's lot, they had all gone to Egypt in a time of hardship up in Israel, the land that we call Israel now. It used to be also called Canaan, but it's Israel basically. Right, so that just, for those people who are interested in knowing where the family history comes from, that's what it is. I know this came up in our group on Friday, or the one before, this Friday, I think. Yes. So I thought, right, it's up there.
It's wonderful.
So you can see where it all fits in. And so I'm going to be, can we have the next slide, please? I'm going to be reading bits of this, and there are bits of it I'm not going to actually read, but I'll kind of speed it up by telling you some of the story. It's all one great big story, And it's an important story. It's one of my favourite stories because it's a story of God getting people out of the sticky mud, if you like, out of a place where they're really stuck and they're in pain and they hate it and they're crying out to God. And anyway, and we're finding the story of how God actually helps them and rescues them and saves them and takes them to another place. So, in the first chapter of Exodus, I'm going to read from verse 8. I'll read part of that. A new king began to rule in Egypt. He did not know who Joseph was. This king said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel are too many, and they are too strong for us to handle. We must make plans against them. If we don't, the number of their people will grow even more. Then, if there's a war, they might join our enemies. Then they could fight against us and escape from the country." Now this king, and they called their kings pharaohs. Pharaoh is the Egyptian word for king. So some translations will say Pharaoh, and this one, because they're trying to modernise the language, they say king. It's the same thing, exactly the same thing. So this king had all these Israelites in his land, and so he wanted to use them. Actually, he wanted to abuse them. He had hundreds and hundreds of people there, thousands of people, I don't know how many there were, but there was a lot of people. And but he's a bit paranoid, he's scared. These people, if I just kind of let them live here and have a nice life, well, they might rise up, they might become more important than me. And they might even form an army or something, who knows? I mean, they weren't doing anything like that. But you know how some people get paranoid? They want to be the boss and they don't want anybody else to threaten them. So this king was very easily threatened. And so he decided to make them slaves. And he was going to treat them as harshly as possible. And they forced the Israelites, I'm just telling this bit of the story, forced the Israelites, and I'm getting this from this bit and adding a few of the other places we know it from too. They were making bricks, they were making other forms of, building materials. And it says here, he says, okay, I'm going to use these as slave labour to build me 2 more cities for myself. King cities, Pharaoh cities. And so the Israelites were really struggling because they were just treated as slaves. They were slaves. They had no say. They couldn't say, "Excuse me, sir, I'm sick. Can I have a bit of time off?" What would the answer have been? Crack of a whip and you get to work. And that's it. No time off, no consideration. And it was absolutely horrible. So I'm now going to jump down to verse 15. Could you do that, please? And I'm going to read from verses 15 to 21. There were 2 Hebrew nurses, or midwives, named Shiphrah and Puah. These nurses helped the Israelite women give birth to their babies. The king of Egypt said to the nurses, "When you are helping the Hebrew women give birth to their babies, watch. If the baby is a girl, let the baby live." That's actually the opposite of what many people do in other countries, but anyway. If the baby is a boy, kill it. Now, wouldn't that be a horrible dilemma to be in? If you are a Hebrew or an Israelite, because those words are used interchangeably here, midwife, and you're delivering babies, and you're supposed to kill all the baby boys. So I've got a question up there. Some people in this story did not tell the whole truth. Were they right or wrong? And why? I want you to think about that as we go through the story. When you are helping, this is what the king said, when you are helping the Hebrew women, I've read that, but the nurses feared God. So they did not do as the king told them to do. They let all the boy babies live. Then the king of Egypt sent for the nurses. He said, "Why did you do this? Why did you let the boys live?" The nurses said to him, "Well, the Hebrew women are much stronger than the Egyptian women. They give birth to their babies before we can even get there." God was good to the nurses, and the Hebrew people continued to grow in number. So they became even stronger. Because the nurses feared God, he gave them families of their own. So did they tell the truth? Did they? What's that, Addie?
Probably not.
Probably not. So would all of the Hebrew women or Israelite women given birth to babies before they could possibly have got there? I don't think so. They just did not want to kill the baby boys. Okay, so before we actually answer that question, can we go to the next one? I want us to think about a parallel situation in our modern times. When I say modern times, I mean World War II times. That's still, a lot closer than, this period in history. Some of you will know this face, a lady called Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch lady. She has died in recent years, but she did live to a good age. Now, when she was young, she lived in Holland with her family, and she was a watchmaker. Why? Because her father was a watchmaker. And so their family lived in a house in Holland, and we've been to that house. And you're going to see some pictures inside that house because her family, when the Nazis came and said, "You've got to turn in to the authorities anyone you know who is a Jew." And so a lot of people did that. And what was going to happen to them? What did happen to them if they were told on that they were Jews? They were killed. That's exactly what happened to them. And so Mr. ten Boom and his wife and their family decided that this was not right. And so they hid, eventually, 800 Jews in their house. Well, not all at once, of course, because there wasn't much space. And I'm going to show you a little video clip that shows you what that house looked like, etc. I should have said that the ten Boom family were Christians.
I'm here at the house of Corrie ten Boom in Haarlem, and I want to tell you a story of how Christians saved Jews during World War II, during the Holocaust. Right in Haarlem, the ten Boom family's watch shop was more than a business. It was a front for a fierce resistance against the Nazi tyranny. Corrie ten Boom, a force of nature, turned her family home into a sanctuary for those hunted by the Gestapo, which was 100 meters from their house. Picture this, a room so tiny that could almost make you feel claustrophobic, but it was a room that determined the fate of hundreds. I want to show you this room. You can see the hiding place. This was the space that determined fate of Jewish people. During the Holocaust, during World War II, it was the wall behind Corrie ten Boom's bedroom. And the crazy part is that when the Gestapo knocked at the door to search, or if they wanted to find out if there are Jews here, so they would ring the bell, the people Here they had 70 seconds to run from the house and go and hide inside this space. Let me show you how you actually get in there. For people who are more older than me, even for me it was a little bit challenging, but just imagine that you're having 70 seconds to run and save your life. By helping the Jews, the Tenbooms, of course, risked their lives. The fate of helping a Jew that time was death. You help a Jew, you die as a Jew. But not all heroes wear capes, and not all stories have the best, perfect ending. And unfortunately, in 1944, the Nazis found out about this whole operation, the hiding place. A Dutch person tipped off the Nazis and they came and they made arrests. Corey's father, brother, sister, and nephew all paid the ultimate price for saving Jews. Corey and her sister Betsy ended up in the Ravensbrück camp, yet even surrounded by death, they didn't let the light of hope flicker out. They held secret Bible sessions, whispering verses of faith over the cries of despair. Betsy, even as her body failed her in that horrific nightmare, she never let go of her hope and a dream for a post-war home for healing and renewal. Her last words to Corey were a lifeline. She said, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still." Corey traveled the globe not just to tell her story, which is remarkable as you can see, but she traveled to preach about forgiveness. Shockingly, even extending a hand of forgiveness to the very guards who tormented them in that Nazi camp. He brings his love, and it's bigger than all the hate, Corey declared, proving that real power lies in forgiveness, not vengeance. Corrie ten Boom is a hero not just of her time, but of all time, because she preaches a story of forgiving the unforgivable. And this is a story of Christians that helped save Jews during the Holocaust. Thank you for watching. Share this video.
Wonderful. So Corrie was put into the Ravensbrück prison camp with her sister Betsy. Betsy died there. Corrie survived. I can't remember how long they were in. Remember how long they were in that prison camp? It was quite a while anyway, and it was really, really horrible. And so there were 4 family members that died, and the others were all put in prison camps for a period and survived. But, you know, there they were. If they were going to say no, then they had to pay the price or had to risk that. But they did save 800 Jewish lives, people who lived. So I want to go back and ask the question again. If we're put into a situation, is it ever right to tell a lie? Because that ten Boom family must have told lies when the Nazis came and said, "Have you got any Jews here in this house?" I had to say no. What we're doing, that's a lie. These nurses in Joseph's time, not Joseph's time, no, before Moses, you know, they said, you know, why? Why are the baby's boys living? Oh, they just give birth so quickly. That's a lie. So does that mean we can tell whatever lies we like? No, it doesn't. I think that this is the only situation that I can think of when you have somebody who is so evil and so anti-God giving you a command to do something as evil as killing innocent people. You know, in the Old Testament, taking innocent blood was a very, 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 very high crime. You know, like that's up there. Killing innocent people. You know, there were rules for fighting in a war. There were rules even for taking someone's life as a capital punishment, things whether you agree with it or not, that was there. But that was measured. That had to be, proven in court. It was a court decision. It wasn't a personal decision. But, these stories used to trouble me when I was young because, I thought, surely telling the truth is what God wants us to do. And I would say strongly, yes, 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 yes. But this is the only place in Scripture that I can find where telling a lie was acceptable.
But you're standing for the truth.
Yes, but we stand for our choice and our decisions in all kinds of ways without having to tell lies. But this one is about, are you going to kill to obey someone for no good reason? Evil, no. And when it says they fear God, it means that they put God first. Would God say that you can kill innocent people for no reason? No. So when you're at a really, that's sort of a hard decision, if there is a conflict between what you're told and what God says, God wins. His word wins. That's the ultimate authority. I mean, you have dictators come and go, don't you? They're all over the place. And they will give stupid commands because they're only concerned about their own ego. So there we are. So Hitler and this king in Egypt were tar with the same brush. All right, let's move on to the next bit of the story. There was a man, as we saw in the family tree, there was a man, chapter 2, man from the family of Levi. He married a woman who was also from the family of Levi, so some sort of cousin. I think she was an aunt, actually, technically. Anyway, she became pregnant and she gave birth to a son. And she hid him because he was a baby boy who had not been given up to Pharaoh to be killed. And so she was able to hide him for about 3 months. And then he was getting a bit big, probably his cries were getting a bit louder. And she thought that, I've got to do something here to save this baby. And so she got a little basket made out of reeds. She put tar all over it, inside it to make it waterproof, and a little lid on the top. And she put the baby in there, and she put it on top of the river, but in the reeds, by the side of the river. And so she sent the oldest child, who was a girl, Miriam, to go down and hover near the river, and for Miriam to watch this baby and make sure that nobody came and killed him. So she was the one to give word, and then she'd probably bring the child back to the mother at night. I'm not sure what the system was. So what happened was that the daughter of the king of Egypt came down to have her bath in the river. And she brought some, servants with her, some other young women. And they came down too, and they heard the baby cry. Now, this is the daughter of the king. Well, being a young woman, her heart was touched. She heard the cry, she took pity on him, and she went and she sent one of her young attendants to go and have a look to find the baby. And she looked at it, probably from the way it was dressed, and she said, this is a Hebrew baby. Now, she could have at that point said, I'm going to turn him over to Dad. He would have been killed. But she courageously did not, and mercifully did not. So I've got a lot of time for that young woman. And so she the big sister, Moses' big sister, because Moses was the baby in that basket, Moses' big sister came along and saw what was happening. And he said, "Excuse me, but would you like me to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby?" "Oh, yes, please," she said. She said, "I'll pay them." Well, how good is that? So that's what happened. So the baby got handed back to his sister, who took the baby home to the mother, the real mother, and that's how Moses was saved. And he began his life being saved. That's a big, big thing. Mm. And so he was saved really because of women in this story. Women were the ones who had the courage. The nurses, and now the daughter of the king. They were the ones who were not going to obey this very cruel and absolutely evil command. So the baby was taken home, and then at a certain age, probably a range between them, then the mother gave the baby back to the daughter of the king to be adopted. And so she adopted Moses, and he grew up as an Egyptian. And this daughter of the king was the one who called him Moses, because the name means he was drawn out of the water. That's where I got it from. He may have had another name that his mother, real mother, gave him, but there we are. Moses was saved through the courage of some women that you think probably wouldn't have shown up as being all that important in their scale of things, but they turned out to be. Okay, we've got a bit more of the story to go. That doesn't look a very nice picture. Here we've got in Exodus chapter 2. I'm going to read this bit, starting at verse 11. Moses grew and became a man, and one day he visited his people, the Hebrews, because he must have known that he was really a Hebrew. He saw that they were forced to work very hard, bearing in mind Moses had grown up in luxury. He would have got a good education, he would have had the best of the time, and he would have been educated so he could talk with other world leaders, and so he would have understood politics, he would have understood languages, and been very skilled in lots of ways, and certainly writing, probably in several languages. But he saw that they were forced to work very hard. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man, one of Moses' own people. What did Moses do? Verse 12. Moses looked all around and saw that no one was watching, so he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. Now, this is not an unjust killing in a way, but it wasn't his responsibility to do it. That's my little bit out of here. Verse 13. The next day, Moses returned and saw two Hebrew men fighting each other. He saw that one man was in the wrong. Moses said to that man, "Why are you hitting one of your own people?" The man answered, "Who made you our ruler and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Well, I'm just going to pause there for a moment. These two men are Hebrews. They're Israelites, but they don't know that Moses is too, because he'd be dressed in Egyptian clothes. They would have all looked much the same. He would have dressed as an Egyptian. He would have been dressed in royal clothes, not ordinary working people's clothes. Like, who made you our boss? They didn't know who he was. Well, go on. Then Moses was afraid. He thought, now everyone knows what I did. When the king heard about it, what Moses had done, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses ran away from the king and went to live in the land of Midian, which is quite some way away. There he sat down near a well. Right. Now, no, we're not up to that one yet. So, nearly. You know, sometimes when you hear about people in the Bible, you think, oh, they're our heroes. They always did the right thing. But here's Moses as a young man. Was he doing the right thing when he saw people fighting and he took it upon himself to just kill someone? Was that the right thing to do? No, it was not. He had no authority to do that. Even the Egyptians had laws. They were actually a very civilised society. And then, when Moses returned the next day and saw the two Hebrew men fighting each other, he did have a right to ask them the question, but he realised that they knew that what he'd done, and by Jewish law, by Hebrew law, Israelite law, all these words, you know what I mean? It was wrong. Because in Old Testament law, which is not written down yet, but the people knew anyway, you can't personally decide, no matter how bad your neighbour is, to go and kill them. Do you agree with that? You can take them to the judges, you can do that. So in other words, they had law courts. You take them there, and if they're guilty, let the courts, let the judges work out what punishment they need to get. But it's not personal. You can't just go and clobber someone you don't like or even somebody who's done wrong to you. Can't do that now. Couldn't do that then. I see this as Moses, a young man who's aware that he's been saved, his life has been saved from young, with a mixed identity. Is he Egyptian or is he Hebrew? We're supposed to keep the Hebrew bit secret. And he desperately wants to be able to do something against injustice. There is injustice here. But he doesn't know the right way around to doing it. He's still got to go through a process of learning more about God and learning more about how God wants him to use this passion against injustice. Is that clear? He's got to learn, just like we all have to learn. He's been to school, but he hasn't been to the school of experience and walking with God yet. That still has to grow. And so he runs away, and that's where he's going to get. He's done his academic training. Now he's got to get time, big time, to learn about living with God, walking with God, listening to God, doing things God's way. But there's something good in there, and that is that he wants to fight against injustice and he wants people to be saved. Okay, next one. This is Midian. There are holes in the ground there. Can you see them? They're water wells. It's a desert, and people are keeping sheep there, so there must be little bits of something that grows that the sheep can eat. But somewhere there, I think here might be an example, they have water troughs because they're actually mentioned in this story. So what they need to do when they bring their flocks of sheep there is they need to get a bucket or whatever they've got and lower it down into the well and then put the water into the water troughs so the sheep can get water. Okay? Now, there's a man in Midian. He's called Jethro, sometimes called Royal, same person, just got two different names. And He has 7 daughters, and he's a shepherd. He has lots and lots and lots and lots of sheep. We don't know how many, but lots. He has 7 daughters, so he sends his 7 daughters off with, sections of the sheep, with, little flocks. And they have to look after them, and they have to go to the well, and they have to take turns to get water out to give to each has to give it to their own section of the sheep. Now what happens is, I'm not going to read this bit, I'm just going to tell this bit, but what happens is when they are there are other shepherds, men, over there, and they've also got flocks of sheep, and they see these girls there, and so they come along and they mock them and they ridicule them, they chase them away, and so these girls are having a really hard time trying to get water for their sheep. You can imagine the situation. Now this is where Moses has landed. He's sitting there by this water well, because that's a pretty good place, at least you get some water, and he's seeing what's happening. So this passion for him against injustice and wanting to save people is still in him. But this time he does a better job. This time he doesn't chase the other guys and kill them all. He simply sends them away, he chases them away, and then he helps the girls to get the water that they need, and he waters their sheep. So then they said, "Oh, come home and meet Dad and have some food with us." And hospitality would also mean come and stay with us. So that's exactly what happened. And Jethro says, well, why? They tell us, the girls tell the story, why are you home so early? They say what happened. And look, here's this lovely Egyptian man, and well, first of all, the girls tell their dad, then he says, bring him home. That's hospitality. So he was invited to stay there with them. He said yes. Well, he didn't have anywhere else, did he? And so in due time, he gave one of his girls to him in marriage. And they ended up having 2 boys that we know of. Whether they had any other girls or not, we don't know about. Okay, so there's that. We're almost at the end of this little bit of the story. Can we go to the next one, please? Right near the end of that paragraph, chapter 2, verse 23. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because they were forced to work very hard. In other words, nothing changed. They got a new king, but they still were slaves and nothing else had changed. They cried for help and God heard them. God heard their cries and he remembered the agreement he made with Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. God saw the troubles of the people of Israel and he was concerned about them. Now the people don't yet know that Moses has been born and God's plan has already begun to work. Now that's where we're going to leave the story. And we're going to be doing bits from the book of Exodus over the next period, not next week because it's a sharing Sunday, not the week after because we're in Huonville, but we'll pick it up after that, and because it is a great book of liberation and it's got loads of principles here that help us to understand Jesus a lot better and also to apply to our lives. Okay, let's sing the last one.